Wind clawed at the valley, turning snow into knives. Engines idled and coughed, steam ghosting from cracked hoods as the convoy sat stranded on the frozen floor of the pass. The lead vehicle's nose was buried in a churned crater of ice and dirt, its track blown clean off. The last truck sagged at a crooked angle, one side torn open and blackened where the second blast had punched through. Between them, for more vehicles huddled in a broken line like animals that had just realized the fence around them was a cage, not a shelter. Rounds chewed into the snow around them in steady, methodical bursts. "Stay down," Lieutenant Cole Ramirez shouted, voice raw from cold and screaming. "Stay in the rut." The rut was barely cover, a shallow trench scraped into the hardpack behind the disabled middle truck. A dozen figures were jammed into it, shoulders pressed together, weapons hugged to their chests. Their breath came out in ragged plumes that turned the air white. Snowflakes stuck to eyelashes, clung to beards, melted into uniforms, and refroze instantly. Private Jonah Pike's hands were numb. He'd lost his gloves somewhere between the second blast and the first burst of machine gun fire. In the scramble, he'd grabbed for a fallen rifle instead of his fallen gear, and now his bare palms were welded to the freezing metal of the truck's side panel. When he tried to shift, skin tore. He hissed, more in surprise than pain. His nerves were past giving him good information. Something slapped the metal just inches from his head and tore out a chunk of paint. He flinched, pressing his face deeper into the snow. The machine gun up on the ridge did not rant. It did not chatter. It stitched. It walked its fire up and down in cold, deliberate lines, as if someone with a ruler was drawing a grid over the convoy and filling in squares. Every time someone moved more than a few inches above the line of the truck, sparks flew on steel and snow spat up around them. "Where the hell are they?" somebody yelled from further down the line. "Top right." Sergeant Harlow roared back, his voice cracking as another mortar whumped in the distance. "Ridgeline, 2 o'clock. Left side 2. His leg was a mess. When the rear truck had taken the second blast, shrapnel had punched through both his calf and the side of the vehicle. Blood had soaked through his winter camo, painting a dark patch down the snow beneath him. He still braced himself against the truck bed, firing in short, angry bursts toward the high ground. "Save your ammo," Cole snapped, grabbing the barrel of Harlow's rifle and shoving it down. "You're just painting yourself." Harlow snarled wordlessly, but eased his finger off the trigger. Another burst from above answered anyway, a stream of tracers carving a glowing path over their heads, then sweeping back the other way. There was something detached about it, something almost clinical. The valley itself felt complicit, its walls rising up in sheer white slopes that funneled sound and bullets back onto them. Radio noise clawed at Cole's ear. He kept his head low and pressed the handset tighter to his helmet, trying to make sense of the broken shrieks of static. "This is Hammer 2. We are..." He winced as feedback screamed. "Say again? Say again, over." Nothing. Just white noise, a distant high-pitched whine under everything, like a dentist drill. "Jammed," muttered Corporal Nunez, the squad's grenadier, breath frosting the microphone of his own headset. "They're jamming us, sir." This whole slice of valleys blacked out. Cole swore under his breath. They were cut off. No fire support. No drone overhead. No quick reaction force to come charging through the storm. It was just them, the snow, and whoever had laid this trap. Another mortar fell short and burst close enough that the concussion shook the truck above their heads. Jonah heard the high metallic whine of hot fragments spinning away, felt one skim over the crown of his helmet like an invisible fingertip. "We're in a kill zone," Harlow shouted, because sometimes saying the obvious made it feel less like it was strangling you. "Open ground, no cover, they've got both ridges. They're bracketing us." "Shut up and breathe," Cole barked. "Everyone stay low, pick your lanes. We're going to punch out to that cut on the left when I say." He pointed with 2 fingers toward a shallow dip in the valley wall, maybe 30 meters away. It wasn't much, just a darker seam in the snow where a rock might be closer to the surface. Right now, under machine gun fire from above, it might as well have been on another planet. Still, the squad's eyes latched onto it, as if it were a door left ajar in a burning room. "On my mark," Cole repeated. "We go in twos. No hero runs, no popping up to. A shadow to his right moved before he could finish. Specialist Dyer, always too quick, always trying to impress, launched himself out of the rut and sprinted toward the cut, boots pounding on the hardpack. Dyer, get down, Harlow bellowed. From the ridge, the machine gun adjusted with icy punctuality. A short burst. 3 shots. Dyer's body jerked mid-stride, weight and momentum suddenly out of sync. For a second, he looked like he might make it anyway. Then his legs gave out, and he cartwheeled into the snow, lying still halfway between the convoy and the maybe cover. Do not move, Cole roared, feeling the order rip out of his lungs like something jagged. Everybody stays put. You keep your damn heads down. The air smelled like burned oil and cordite and the strange, clean nothing of snow. The truck's engine clanked and hissed as it cooled, ticking in the brief gaps between incoming bursts. Jonah's teeth were chattering. He couldn't tell if it was the cold or the fear. His fingers hurt again now, a deep throbbing pain under the surface of his skin where it had torn. He wanted to peel his hands away from the truck and shove them into his armpits. But every time he started to move, another line of tracer reached down from above and told him that motion equaled death. Someone was sobbing softly 2 positions down. Someone else was laughing in short, hysterical barks that cut off whenever the machine gun spoke. Then, suddenly, the valley inhaled. The gunfire didn't stop all at once. It faltered, stuttered, and then there was a fraction of a second where only the wind had a voice. It screamed down off the peaks, dragging streamers of snow off the ridges, swirling them into cruel spirals. The little crystals danced in the air like a million tiny stars, drifting in front of Jonah's eyes. He realized, for the first time in what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, that the radio in his ear was silent. No static, no shriek, just the lonely moan of the storm. In that hollowed-out space, a voice slipped in. "Viper, this is Overwatch 1, a woman's whisper said, calm as if she were sitting in a warm room somewhere. You dare to freeze my soldiers? The words were barely louder than the wind, but they cut through Jonah's skull. He could see the same stunned recognition on Cole's face, on Harlow's. They all knew that voice. He didn't have time to say her name. A single, sharp crack floated down from somewhere above into their left. Not the angry, chattering stutter of the ridge gun. One round. Clean. Almost polite. Up on the slope, the machine gun fell silent mid-burst. The last few tracers it had spat out drifted on, losing cohesion, winking out as they buried themselves harmlessly in drifts. The ambient rattle of automatic fire from that angle died with it, leaving only the other ridge still firing sporadically. The hell was that? Nunez breathed. Another crack. A beat later. Jonah risked a glance, craning his neck just enough to angle his eyes over the edge of the rut. The world was a blur of white and gray and motion up there, but he saw a shape on the far ridge stand up, jerk, that disappeared down the far side. The shots that had been picking off anyone who twitched from that direction simply stopped. Crack. The rocket team he'd been trying not to think about. 2 shadows clustered behind a half-buried boulder, one cradling a tube on his shoulder, vanished in a puff of powder. Snow erupted all around them, as if the mountain itself had spat them out. Someone's up there, Harlow muttered. Someone's got our back. Who? Nunez asked. Cole squinted up into the storm. He searched the serrated crest lines, the gullies and cornices, the dark mouths of rock outcrops. All he saw was moving snow and the hint of shapes that could have been boulders or bodies, shadows, or tricks of light. The wind peeled sheets of powder off the faces, making everything ripple. There was no visible muzzle flash, no silhouette against the skyline, just that patient, terrifying rhythm. Crack. On the right ridge, a thin mass snapped in half, the makeshift radio antenna tumbling away in pieces. A few scattered shooters who had been firing from that side went suddenly very, very still, like animals who had just realized a much larger predator was also present. Whoever they are, Cole said, voice low, we're going to stay alive long enough for them to finish their work. Hold your positions. Use what they're giving us. Jonah's gaze drifted back to the broken skyline, to the nowhere from which the rounds kept appearing. Snow collected along his lashes, forming white spikes that narrowed his view to a tunnel. He swallowed, tasting metal and fear. "Who is she?" he whispered, the question freezing in the air in front of his lips. No one answered. Up on the high ground, far beyond what their eyes could find, a woman lay behind a rifle with her cheek against cold metal and her heart beating slow and even, the past clawing at her even as she took the next measured breath and pressed the trigger again. That morning, the snow at Outpost Kilo had seemed almost gentle. It fell in lazy, drifting sheets, softening the hard lines of HESCO barriers and antenna masts, filling in the tracks of last night's patrols. The sky was a flat, pale gray, hiding the peaks, but letting a thin glow seep through, like light filtered through frosted glass. Diesel engines idled in a crooked line. 6 vehicles, their camo blotched with salt and grime and fresh dusting of powder, steamed quietly as crews strapped down loads and checked chains. Men and women moved around them in bulky winter gear, boots squeaking on the packed snow, breath puffing in front of their faces. Corporal Mara Kade sat on the back bumper of the second vehicle, the sniper rifle across her knees. Her gloved fingers traced the shallow grooves carved into the worn stock. They weren't deep enough to catch a fingernail, just little notches along the grain. If anyone asked, she'd say they were just from bumps and scrapes, the normal scars of a weapon used hard in rough terrain. No one asked. Most of the squad had learned long ago that Mara didn't volunteer much. She listened. She watched. She spoke when there was something that needed saying, and even then, often so quietly that others had to shut up to hear her. Lieutenant Cole stood near the front of the line, map board under his arm, hood down despite the snow. He always seemed to run hot, heat and intensity leaking off him in waves as he paced. Now he had one hand jammed into his pocket, the other stabbing at the laminate with a pen. "All right, listen up," he called, voice carrying easily down the row of vehicles. "Task is simple. We escort Captain Varga and her magic briefcase down the valley to sensor site Echo. Drop off the gear, babysit her while she does her chat with the folks there, then continue down to LZ Frostbite for bird pickup. Weather window says we've got 4 hours before visibility goes to hell. I like us off the valley floor and sipping coffee under rotor wash before that happens." Nervous chuckles sparked along the line. "Movement order is as briefed," Cole went on. "First and last vehicles are tracks. Middle 4 are wheeled. Vargas with 3. Encryption module and drives are with our radio man, Petrovich. Protect both like they're your favorite sibling." "Don't have one of those, sir," Harlow said from somewhere near the rear, adjusting his rig. "Fake it," Cole shot back. "Any questions before we roll?" Mara slid off the bumper and walked forward, boots leaving narrow prints. As she passed, Jonah snapped a half-hearted salute that was more like a flapping wave. She paused long enough to flick a glance at his gloves. "Thumbs exposed," she said. He blinked, looked down, and saw that the flap on his trigger finger had come undone again, leaving bare skin peeking through. He cursed under his breath and fumbled with it. "If it freezes, you'll miss when it matters," she added, then moved on. At the front, Cole tucked his map under his arm and looked over the assembled faces. Snow dotted his eyebrows, clung to the stubble along his jaw. "Look, I'm not going to pretend intel is perfect," he said. "We've had increased enemy chatter in the region. Some traffic referencing movement on this route. Hire says no confirmed presence in the valley itself, but keep your heads on a swivel. Standard spacing, standard protocols. If something feels wrong, call it out." It was the kind of speech officers were supposed to give, part reassurance, part warning, part checklist. Mara listened, but her attention was elsewhere. She'd spent the night before up on the outpost's east wall, pretending to be on watch and actually watching mountains. The valley they would be driving in and knifed its way between 2 ridges like a scar carved by some ancient blade. She'd watched snow slide down its shoulders in little avalanches, watched distant flares from artillery practice, watched the faint, ghostly glow of the storm building beyond the horizon. Now, as she let her gaze drift past Cole's shoulder to the jagged line of peaks, she saw something that snagged in her mind. On the far slope, where the trees thinned out and gave way to bare rock. A dark line of tracks cut across a face that should have been too unstable to hold them. Not animal prints. Too straight, too deliberate, and too fresh, edges still crisp, not yet softened by falling snow. Her eyes narrowed. Further along the same slope, where avalanche control teams usually set charges, she expected to see the faint pockmarks and broken cornices their blasts left behind. Instead, this section was smooth, untouched, like someone had skipped it on purpose. "You've got that look," a voice said quietly next to her. Harlow had drifted over without her noticing, his beard already gathering snowflakes. He followed her gaze, squinting. "See something?" he asked. "There." She pointed just enough to indicate, not enough to skyline her hand. "Tracks on that face. Too clean, and no blast scars on that run. They skipped it. Could be old," Harlow said. "From before the last dump." "The wind was hard last night," she answered. "Anything older would be filled in. Those edges are new." He grunted, not dismissing, not fully agreeing. "Could be mountain goats." "Goats don't walk straight lines to nowhere," she said. He studied the slope for another few seconds, then shrugged as much as his ruck allowed. "Mention it to the LT," he said. "Worst he does is tell you to add it to your collection of things to worry about." She found Cole as he was walking toward the command tent for one last check-in with Hire. Snow squeaked under her boots. "Sir," she said. He turned. "What's up, Kay?" "Tracks on the east face," she said. "Section that was supposed to get avalanche control. It's clean. Tracks are straight. No melt, no filling. Someone moved across that face in the last few hours." Cole glanced toward the mountains, then back at her. "You think it's them?" "I think it's not goats," she said. "And if the control team skipped that run, someone told them to, or scared them off it." He scratched his jaw. "You think the valley's compromised?" "Yes, sir." "Anything on sensors?" he asked. "Nothing on our feeds," she said. "But the storm's dirty. Lots of noise." He blew out a breath, little plumes spiraling. "Hire says no confirmed enemy positions. We've got a narrow window, and Varga's already on the net about her timeline. I can't justify rerouting the whole movement on a maybe." Her fingers tightened on the sling across her chest. A scar along her forearm, just under the cuff of her glove, itched under the layers of the phrase "on a maybe." On another mission, another valley, she'd said the same words to herself. She'd watched the pattern in the tracks, the strange silence on the net, the way the local shepherds had vanished. She'd felt the itch between her shoulder blades and convinced herself she was reading ghosts. 3 hours later, she'd been lying behind a low stone wall watching her squad leader's body cooling in the dirt 30 meters away, a plume of smoke rising from the burned-out skeleton of their vehicle. She kept her mouth shut then, afraid of being wrong, afraid of being the one who slowed everything down. Wrong fear, she'd learned. "Sir," she said softly now, pushing through the tightness in her throat. "If they wanted to catch a convoy like ours, they'd prep that valley. Set charges under the road, pick their fields of fire on the ridges, maybe bring in a jammer. Those tracks look like someone's setting up. Even if I'm only half right, it's a bad half to ignore." Cole watched her, one brow lifting. Snow collected on the rim of his helmet. He knew her record. He knew she'd been there when things had gone badly somewhere else, that she still carried that weight like an extra plate in her loadout. "I hear you," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "But I can't sell higher on a full abort right now. Not off that." Her jaw clenched. "At least let me ride rear." "Not middle," she said. "I want eyes on the slopes as we go in, free to dismount and get on a flank if it feels wrong. And I want Petrovich toward the center, not front." "Already had Petrovich in 4, he said. "Rear instead of middle," though he hesitated, then nodded once. "Fine. You're in 6. You see something start to go sideways, you call it." She nodded. It wasn't enough. It was more than nothing. In the command tent, the air smelled like stale coffee and nylon. An operations map was pinned to a board, the valley traced in red. A captain from higher headquarters was pointing at timestamps and notes written in dry erase, talking about increased radio chatter from insurgent groups in the region. Phrases like possible movement and no confirmed contact floated through the static of Mara's thoughts. Someone mentioned satellite relay issues. "This valley's always been a dead zone," the staff captain said. No line of sight to the bird from the floor. Comms will be patchy. Stick to your convoy frequencies. Don't expect miracles. Outside again, Mara walked past the small green case that held the portable encryption module and drives. Petrovich was checking the seals on it, his beard already white with frost. The gear was apparently worth more than the trucks they were loading it into, a compact brain full of movement patterns and intercepts, the kind of data that could help them anticipate enemy routes, safe houses, logistics. Last time someone moved this crate, Petrovich muttered as she approached, they got a drone escort and 3 extra vehicles. We get a storm as our chaperone. Lucky us. Maybe they thought we needed the challenge, Mara said lightly. He snorted. Across the motor pool, Jonah was hopping from foot to foot, trying to drive warmth into his toes. She crossed the strip of trampled snow and stopped in front of him. Let me see your hands, she said. He held them out automatically, palms up. She inspected his gloves, the seams, the flaps over his trigger fingers. Keep these shut until we're under fire, she said. And when that happens, don't let your skin touch the metal any longer than it has to. The cold steel's faster than bullets sometimes. He smiled, trying to play off the seriousness. You worried about me, Corp? I'm worried about everyone, she said. You just make it obvious. Behind her, engines revved higher. Cole's voice cut through the air again, calling them to mount up. Time was moving. The storm on the horizon was darker now, the band of it smudging the line where mountains met sky. She tightened her sling, slung her rifle, and climbed into the rear vehicle. As they rolled out of the outpost gate, radios cracking with normal chatter and a few bad jokes about frostbite, she settled into her corner seat and turned her attention completely to the world outside the armored glass. As the convoy followed the narrow road down toward the valley, Mara wasn't listening to the jokes. She was measuring angles, counting slopes, noting every bend where a blast could flip a vehicle, every outcrop that could hide a man with a sight line. Behind her calm, watchful eyes, the memory of another valley burned like a brand. This time, she promised herself she would not let maybe be the last word. The valley narrowed around them like teeth closing. Trees thinned, green smudges fading into bare trunks streaked with snow and ice. The road became less a road and more a suggestion, a strip of compacted white between 2 rising walls. The sky above shrank to a slit, dull light filtering down, making everything washed out and flat. From her seat in the rear vehicle, Mara watched the slopes. Avalanche control markers, little flags and scorched scars where charges had been set, dotted the walls at regular intervals. Here and there, black smudges of blast marks broke up the clean white. But as they pushed deeper, she saw the pattern shift. A whole section of wall, hundreds of meters long, bore no marks at all. No scars, no flags. Held back, she thought. Left alone, like someone saving a blank page for later. Hey, Kade, Jonah said from the bench opposite, voice muffled by his balaclava. You always stare at mountains like they owe you money. Sometimes, she said. What's this one owe you? He asked. She considered the question. An honest answer, she said. One way or another. Before he could make a joke about that, the lead vehicle slowed. Snow kicked up around its tracks as it crept into a bend where the valley tightened even further. The walls came in close now, steep and slick, studded with boulders like knuckles. Her left hand closed around the rifle's pistol grip. She unbuckled without really thinking about it, feeling the vehicle's motion more than hearing it through the engine's drone. Everything okay? Nunez called from the front of the troop compartment. Feels wrong, she said. Feels cold. Jonah muttered. Feels like my nose is going to fall off. The sensation in the air shifted. Nothing visible at first, just a tension in her gut, a sense of the world drawing in a breath. Then the road exploded. A hard crack, not gunfire, not exactly, and the nose of the lead vehicle kicked up, one track thrown into the air. Snow, dirt, and chunks of ice shot upward in a white-brown geyser. The vehicle lurched sideways, groaning like a wounded animal, and slammed back down at an angle that buried its front and twisted its hull. Time seemed to stretch. The second vehicle slammed on brakes, skidding. Shouts crackled over the net. Contact front, someone screamed. Mara was already moving. She hit the door release and spilled into the snow as the world around her erupted into sound. The second blast hit the rear truck. It came from beneath them, a hard, vicious punch that lifted the vehicle's tail, rolled it slightly, then dropped it like a toy knocked out of a child's hand. For a heartbeat, she was weightless, boots leaving the ground as shock traveled through chassis, through limbs, through bone. She hit the snow and rolled. The air slammed out of her lungs. The roar of the explosion was still reverberating when the first bullets arrived. They came in neat chains, stitching through the air from high above. Tracers glowed dull orange against the gray sky, drawing arcs as they swept down toward the vehicles. Somewhere above and right, a machine gun rattled in controlled bursts. Mara flattened herself against the valley wall, pressing into the shallow shadow of a rock protrusion. Get out, get out! Harlow's voice boomed over the net, followed by an ugly squeal of feedback. Static flooded her ear. The net heaved, squealed, then went dead except for a faint, high hiss. Jammed, she thought immediately. She saw Petrovich dragging the green encryption case out of the overturned rear truck, half crawling, half sliding in the snow as rounds punched into the vehicle's hull around him. Jonas stumbled after him, his gloves askew. The third vehicle's doors flew open. Nunez and two others spilled into the narrow gap between truck and wall, pressed flat, instinctively hugging the very mild depression his driver had carved by nudging up close. Move to cover. Cole's voice shouted somewhere ahead, distant and broken by static, but audible enough to cut through the chaos. Use the trucks. Smoke, smoke. Grenades arced out, hissing as they spewed thick gray clouds that instantly began mixing with a white swirl of snow. For a moment, Mara hoped it might help. Then the mortars started. The first round landed long, bursting high on the slope behind them, sending down an extra shower of powder. The second walked in closer, hitting in the center of the convoy line. Shrapnel rang off metal, hot fragments whining off into the cold air. They know our spacing, she realized. They know what distances we use between vehicles. They'd pre-sighted the valley, plotted the grid. This wasn't some hurried ambush thrown together with a few rifles and a dream. This was a plan. A round smashed into the rock 2 feet from her head, spitting fragments that peppered her shoulder. She ducked, even though there was nowhere else to go. She scanned the slopes, trying to pick out muzzle flashes through the blowing snow and smoke. On the left ridge, high up, she saw the faint flicker of the machine gun, tucked behind a fold of rock. On the right, individual rifles barked from angles that covered the truck's blind spots. Perfectly placed, perfectly timed. Her heart hammered, but her breathing stayed steady, years of training forcing it into a slow, mechanical rhythm even as adrenaline surged. Inhale, exhale count. An explosion and a scream pulled her attention down. Petrovich had made it halfway to the nearest truck when a fragment caught him in the side. He toppled into the churned snow, the green case slipping from his grasp and hitting the ground with a dull thump. No! Mara snapped, without meaning to. Jonah dropped to his knees beside the radio man, hands already patting viciously at the pooling blood. Medic, he yelled. The medic was already moving, low-crawling through the swirling smoke. Bullets stitched the snow just behind him, chased by a fast adjustment from above. Mara pushed off the wall and sprinted the few steps to reach them, sliding in behind the engine block of the nearest truck. Metal groaned overhead as rounds pounded into the hood. She hooked an arm through the handle of the green case and dragged it the last meter into what little cover there was. Pressure here, she barked at Jonah, grabbing his hand and planting it hard on Petrovich's wound. Don't let go. Even if the world ends, you don't let go. Okay, he stammered, fingers trembling as blood soaked through his gloves. She risked a glance toward the head of the convoy. The lead vehicle was angled sharply, blocking most of the road, its front buried. Someone was waving from behind it, screaming something Mara couldn't hear over the gunfire and the ringing in her ears. Cole was somewhere up there, trying to get control, trying to find a way out of a geometry designed to cancel all ways out. She pressed her back to the truck and looked up at the slopes again. The obvious routes were death. The shallow gullies where a person might scramble up toward a slightly higher firing position were already under constant fire. She watched as a figure from the third truck tried to make for one of them, hugging the wall, then jerked and fell as two rifles on the right ridge calmly stitched their path. They pre-sighted everything we would normally do, she thought. They studied us, watched patrols, watched convoys, learned the standard responses, and built the trap out of that knowledge. Her radio hissed. A voice struggled through, chopped and distorted by the jammer's blanket, but she recognized the timbre. 2. This is base, signal degraded, artillery support read. Then the shriek came back, drowning it all. She ducked as a mortar hit 30 meters away, feeling the concussion in her chest. Fragments punched into the side of the truck, singing. Supplies are going to run out, the medic gasped as he worked over Petrovich's wound, half to himself. We can't burn through everything here. We can't. He didn't finish the thought, but Mara knew it. Bullets and bandages. Both had limits. Cole snapped around the front of the truck, slid into the thin rut beside them, and slammed his back to the metal. He was breathing hard, eyes bright with anger and calculation. We're pinned, he said without preamble. We try to make a straight run forward or back, they'll walk fire across us. One gun at least, maybe two. Mortars bracketing us. Jamming's active, so no air until that stops. Ideas? Kill the jamming, Mara said. Kill the guns. Open some sky. And how do you propose we stroll up there and ask them and knock it off? He demanded, voice biting. She looked up, scanning the left ridge. Somewhere beyond the obvious gullies, beyond the kill lanes they prepared, there had to be something the enemy believed was too risky to use. Something they would assume no one would try. Her gaze snagged on a narrow chute of snow and rock cutting diagonally up the cliff face. It was steep, the kind of steep where your whole world narrowed to the next handhold. The kind of steep where one bad step turned gravity into an executioner. No avalanche control scars crossed it. No flags. The snow there looked deep and unstable. Wind scoured on one side and hanging heavy on the other. That, she said. Cole followed her line of sight. That'll kill you, he said instantly. It'll kill anyone dumb enough to send a squad up it, she said. They'll have every gully and shelf zeroed in. But that chute? Too unstable. Too exposed. They'll think we're not crazy enough to use it. Are we? He asked. I am, she said. He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head sharply. Negative. We don't split forces under this kind of fire. If we don't, we die here, she said evenly. I can't get an angle from down here. They own the sky on both sides. Let me get above the line of fire, find their overwatch and the jammer. Take them apart. You keep everyone alive long enough for that to matter. Even as she spoke, another burst walked along the truck roofs, metal ringing. Jonah flinched. Harlow shouted something back toward the immobilized lead vehicle, words lost in the clatter. Cole's jaw worked. Protocol screamed at him not to send someone alone into that kind of climb. Every manual, every briefing, every after-action report said you didn't peel off assets in a kill zone unless you had no other options. He looked at the slope again, at the chute, at the ridges hammering his people. We're burning ammo fast, Harlow called from the next truck over. Medics got 2 wounded and more coming. We try to run, they'll mow us down. We need that gun shut up, sir. Cole looked back at Mara. She saw the moment he stepped off whatever internal ledge he'd been standing on. Fine, he said, the word clipped. You go. You see anything up there that looks like control, guns, antennas, someone with binoculars, you make them your world. Don't go hero-cade. You get as many shots as you can. When it's too hot, you bail. Clear. I'll move when they move, she said. You hear firing change, be ready. He grabbed her shoulder, fingers squeezing hard through her jacket. Don't you make me write a letter because of a maybe again, he said, surprising her with the echo of her own memory. I'm trying to avoid that, she answered. Then she was moving, sliding along the truck, using its bulk as cover until she reached the point where the wall bent inward, slightly near the base of the chute. Enemy fire tracked across the open ground, but for a second, when a mortar landed and threw up a screen of powder, the pattern faltered. She took that second, stepped out into the hazard, and began to climb. The chute was worse up close. From below, it had looked steep and narrow. From within it, it felt like falling upward endlessly, using hands and feet in sheer defiance of gravity. Snow lay in deep, unstable layers over ice. Every foothold was a guess. Her boots bit into the surface and threatened to slide at any misstep. Rounds snapped overhead when the enemy gunners caught glimpses of movement. Somewhere above and to her right, a rifle barked, then another. Chips of rock whirred past her face. She hugged the wall, keeping her profile as low as possible. Her pack caught on a jut of stone, jerking her sideways. For an instant her right foot slipped, boots skimming on ice. Her stomach lurched. She slammed her palm into the snow, fingers digging through powder until they found a ridge of rock. Her glove squeaked as she grabbed it and hauled herself back into balance. "Not here," she murmured to herself. "Not like this." She took stock. Weight was too high. Too much gear. She found a micro shelf on the wall and wedged herself into it, then shrugged off anything she didn't absolutely need. A spare layer, a ration pack, the extra battery for a piece of kit she knew she wouldn't use up here. She left it tucked into a crevice. If she survived, she could come back for it. If not, someone else might one day find an odd little cache in the mountain and wonder who'd left it. She kept the essentials: rifle, 3 magazines strapped tight where she could reach them, a small med kit. Her compact spotter scope clipped her chest. Below, the convoy had shrunk to toy size, though the sound of the fight still rolled up the valley walls like surf. From this angle, the pattern in the enemy fire was clearer. The machine gun up and left was the anchor. The rifles on the right ridge swept lanes, catching anyone who tried to shift. Mortars thumped from a position out of sight. She climbed higher. Mortar fragments whined into the chute at one point, clattering off the stone. One jagged piece slammed into the wall near her face, sparking. A sliver shaved off, spinning through the air, and nicked the side of her rifle scope. She felt the vibration travel down into her hands. She glanced at the optic. The impact had bent one side of the mount slightly, skewing the alignment. The glass itself was intact, but the zero would be off. She swore, breath steaming, and pressed herself against the rock while another burst of rounds tore through the air over the chute. When they passed, she pulled a strip of tape and a length of webbing from her pocket and worked in quick, precise motions, tightening the mount back into as close to alignment as she could manage without tools. It wouldn't be perfect, but perfect was a luxury they didn't have. She could compensate. She'd done it before when dust or rain or mishandling had knocked things off by half a minute or more. She'd learned this new shift in the first couple of shots and adjust in her head. "You still with us up there?" Cole's voice crackled faintly in her ear, distorted but recognizable under the static. "Working on your storm problem," she replied, the words coming out calmer than she felt. "Petrovich is bad," he said. "Medic's doing what he can. We're holding, but mortars are walking closer. Tell Jonah to keep his hands on that wound," she said. "Tell everyone else to stay angry, not scared." "You tell them when you get back," he said, and then the line dissolved again into white noise. She kept climbing. The wind intensified as she rose, whipping through the chute like water in a gorge. It tore at her hood, pushed her sideways, tried to pry her fingers off their holds. Snow swirled, stinging her cheeks where the wind found gaps in her scarf. Her muscles burned. Fear sat in her belly like ice, but each time it tried to claw up into her throat, she shoved it back down with the same force she used to haul herself over the next lip of rock. At one point, she paused behind a narrow outcrop, back pressed hard to cold stone, lungs heaving. Below, the convoy was barely visible through drifting smoke. She saw tiny flashes of muzzle fire, flickers of movement. She saw Petrovich's vehicle burning now, black smoke pouring out in a thick column. She also saw Jonah, or someone his size and gait, hunched over a prone body. The medic crouched beside him. Cole was moving between positions, yelling and gesturing. She could not hear words at this distance, but she could read urgency in the way they moved. She could see the cold beginning to win. Movements were slower now, less fluid. "You dared to freeze my soldiers," she thought, and felt something hot flare in her chest against the cold. That old scar on her arm burned. The memory of a different valley, a different ambush, surfaced again. Her team leader lying motionless. Her own voice strangled. The words she'd wanted to say trapped because she hadn't been sure, hadn't wanted to be seen as jumpy. She would not let that be the echo here. She pushed on. Near the top of the chute, the walls narrowed. She had to turn sideways and shuffle, her pack scraping against rock. The rifle angled across her body. For a moment she was blind, the world reduced to the texture of stone and the sound of her own breath. Then the chute opened sideways into a slim crease in the cliff face, a natural ledge hidden from below and above by overhangs and a curving lip of snow. In one corner, the wind had carved a small cave into a drift, a hollow about the size of a car's interior. She slid into it like a swimmer into a wave. Sound changed instantly. The howl of the wind dropped to a muted moan. The gunfire below became distant, like a battle taking place in another world. She moved to the mouth of the cave and eased her rifle forward, resting it on her pack. From here, her view of the valley transformed. She could see down onto the enemy's positions now, instead of up. The machine gun nest that had been a flicker of light from below was a distinct shape, a low wall of piled rock and snow, a gun on a bipod, belts snaking back to a covered box. Two figures hunched behind it, one firing, one loading. To the right, along the opposite ridge, she spotted pairs of shooters tucked behind boulders, rifles poking out through gaps in snow screens. Their muzzle flashes were almost invisible from below. From above, their positions were obvious. Further back along the right ridge, near a notch in the rock, a cluster of men hovered around a metal crate with cables running from it to a makeshift antenna array. A small diesel generator chugged beside it, coughing smoke. The jammer. Beyond them, tucked slightly lower, she saw a figure with binoculars and a radio handset, standing instead of lying down, giving hand signals to someone out of sight. His gear was a little different, cleaner, more layered. The way others glanced toward him, even while firing, told her what she needed to know. Ground commander. Priority ladder built itself in her mind without conscious effort. Sniper and overwatch threats, command and control nodes, jamming, then heavy weapons pointed at her people. She took a breath. Another. She checked her magazines, counting round with a thumb and a glance. She had enough if she made every shot count. Enough to change the shape of the fight. Wind gusts probed at her firing position, pushing her barrel a centimeter too. She watched the tendrils of snow in the air, learned their rhythm in a few seconds. The storm wasn't random. Nothing ever was, not entirely. Her scope, though slightly off, would magnify the tremble in her hands if she let fatigue rule. She chose instead to let the muscle memory of thousands of slow, boring range days take over. Below, the jammer continued to hum, drowning her squad's voices, cutting them off from help. The gun nest walked its fire along the line, metadata of death. She placed the crosshairs on the gunner's head, noted the slight drag to the right from her damaged mount, shifted her aim a fraction, and exhaled. "You dared to freeze my soldiers," she whispered, not to taunt, but to anchor. As she squeezed the trigger, the crack from her rifle echoed off the rock. Down below, the gunner's helmet snapped back. His body folded like a puppet with strings cut, dropping sideways and dragging the belt across the feed tray, jamming his own weapon as he fell. It was, from the convoy's perspective, as if the mountain had suddenly taken their tormentor by the throat and squeezed. The line of tracers cut off mid-sweep. Mara operated the bolt, chambered the next round, and swung her aim to the spotter beside the gunner. He was turning already, mouth open in a shout, hands reaching for the weapon. She sent him tumbling back over the low wall with her second shot. By the time the echo of that discharge had faded, she was already adjusting for her third. On the right ridge, a rifleman with a better vantage had been punishing anyone who dared move near the third truck. He lay prone behind a rock, his barrel just peeking out. From below, he'd been a ghost. From up here, he was a clear silhouette against the snow. She sent a round through the small patch where she knew his head must be, letting the winds tug and her mount's misalignment be part of the equation instead of fighting them. A spray of snow and a limp arm confirmed the hit. She kept going. Spotter with binoculars. Radio operator with headset. A man leaning over the jammer's control panel, tapping something in with practiced fingers. Shot, breath, bolt shot. A rhythm. The jamming unit operator slumped over his machine, hands slipping off a switch. The next round punched through the base of the antenna mast, sending it sparking and collapsing in pieces. Static in her ear changed pitch, then thinned. Voices began to leak through again, broken but recognizable. Is this too? Say again. Overwatch that you. Cole's voice swam up through the noise. Mara shifted to the far side of her cave, taking a slightly different angle, and lined up on a man in a heavier coat who was standing near a mortar tube, binoculars raised, mouth moving as he shouted corrections. The wind tugged at her barrel. Her hands were trembling now, fatigue starting to seep in, but she rode it out, waited for the tiny moment when everything in her scope stopped drifting for a heartbeat. Overwatch 1, she said softly into the mic, as she had said 100 times in training, in drills, in missions that had not ended with bodies in snow. Viper, do you read? Static hissed. Then, faintly, Overwatch reading you. You picked a hell of a time to show up. She smiled without humor. You dare to freeze my soldiers, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Couldn't let that stand. Glad we're thawing then, Cole said, and she could hear the strain under the attempt at levity. Can you keep doing whatever you're doing? Yes, she said simply. Then we're going to live, he replied. Let me know when you need the world to move. Below, as her shots continued, the pattern of enemy fire began to fray. Would have been a tight net loosened as spotters went down and leaders fell. Gunners hesitated, glancing over shoulders. The coherent machine that had been set up in this valley developed a stutter. The storm itself seemed to pause to watch. She didn't have forever. The storm would close in further, visibility shriveling. The enemy would adapt when they realized where the shots were coming from. They'd send someone up or bring something heavier to bear. For now, though, for this sliver of time carved out between choices, one woman on a hidden ledge held the levers of the fight. She intended to use every second.